Hello and welcome to the Game Day Podcast with me, Sam Matterface, talkSPORT's chief football correspondent, Alex Crook, and international football expert, Kevin Hatchard, all here to look back at the Premier League weekend. On today's pod, rock and stroll, Mick Jagger turns up to watch the Gunners gobble up the points at the Cottage. Is that all you've got? Newcastle keep the pressure on the top four as United stumble at home. Liverpool's top four hopes crushed by the Cherries. And Chelsea win 3 in a row. Eh? Chelsea win 3 in a row? It's all on the Game Day Podcast from talkSPORT.
Comes to Billing, joining late, and he pops it in, and Bournemouth have the lead. Liverpool's record Premier League goal scorer steps up left-footed and sends it over the bar. What a dreadful penalty.
The game was pretty much the opposite of what we wanted to show and to do today. We didn't have only setbacks, but we had too many. That's clear. Today was a proper one, no doubt about that. Now we have to deal with it. We will deal with it. It's one thing we learned in this season, to deal with setbacks.
Yeah, and what a weekend it was live on the talkSPORT network. And you may not have got your usual bout of analysis this weekend. So we'll try and do our best to make sure that we give it to you here on the Game Day Podcast. Bournemouth, though, had a cracking start to the weekend, beating Liverpool by 1-0. They clambered out of the relegation zone. Hey, who would have seen that coming, Crook?
Well, I won't say I told you so, but I thought they were worth it, Bournemouth. I don't think it was a fluke. Obviously, Mo Salah's penalty is probably still on its way to the moon, I would imagine. But they had opportunities, Bournemouth, actually, to make the win more emphatic. And it must be really frustrating being Kev Hatchard this morning. It's probably frustrating being Kev Hatchard most days. But when you win 7-0 against your nemesis one week and then you lose 1-0 away from home against a team that most people believe are the worst in the division, I mean, how do you start to rationalise that? Liverpool's away form is dreadful, but I'm pleased for Bournemouth, pleased for Gary O'Neill, because I think he's got a lot of unfair scrutiny. Dongo Watara, by the way, Sam, really like him. Raw, but what an exciting player.
Yeah, and he took advantage, didn't he, Kev, of the high line that Liverpool play?
Yeah, and they played that perfectly, Sam, because I thought Watara, when he signed, we talked about him, you knew he was fun at Lorient, and I think he proved that at Bournemouth, not just in this game, but in other games. Just on Crookie's point about being frustrated, obviously looking like this and not making it as a catwalk model is very frustrating, but it is what it is. Not everybody recognises beauty in the same way. I thought Bournemouth were really smart. I thought they defended diligently, hit on the counter. I don't think it's as bad as some of the performances Liverpool have had. Wolves away, dreadful. Brighton away, dreadful. This wasn't great in many ways, but if Van Dijk's header goes in, it's a completely different game. If Salah's penalty goes in, completely different game. So, big setback, but I don't think it quite rings the alarm bells in the way some of the other performances have.
Yeah, I thought defensively there was a moment for the goal where Virgil van Dijk seems to sort of slow down and stop as Watara gets to the byline. But they had a couple of warnings before the goal from Philip Billing, didn't they? I think that was the third time that he'd got in behind. Why did they not react, Crook?
Well, it's odd because the one thing you know about Bournemouth now with the signings they made in the summer is they do have pace to get in behind. So all it needed really was Jurgen Klopp to ask his defence just to sit a little bit deeper. I was watching the game actually in the Portsmouth press room with Brian Laws, former Sheffield Wednesday manager, and he was really hammering Trent Alexander-Arnold, saying, first and foremost, he's a defender. His job is to keep the ball out of the net.
Brian, an ex-right back as well, so it's worth pointing out that he got to an FA Cup final with Nottingham Forest as a right back.
Yeah, he was quite animated about it. Didn't understand why he was keeping such a high line. So, yeah, I think maybe Jurgen Klopp got a little bit schooled by Gary O'Neill.
Yeah, I think sometimes we have a go at Trent Alexander-Arnold because a lot happens down his side. But I thought Van Dijk was culpable for a couple of big mistakes at the weekend. And actually, when I was talking to Jason Cundy and Scott Minto on the Game of the Day show, see what we did there, on Saturday night on talkSPORT, one of the things that Jason said is that he thought that Virgil van Dijk was overrated. Now, I'm not necessarily sure that I agree with that, but I understand that over the last year, since he's come back from injury, he hasn't been the same player, has he, Kev?
No, he hasn't. That's fair to say. And that's partially down to the Liverpool situation this season because the structure in front of him hasn't been as good. I think most defenders, when they haven't got that protection, aren't going to look quite as good. Fabinho's loss of form, I think, has exposed him a bit more. But I think he's still a great defender. Is he the same defender as he was before the injury? No.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about a feel-good story because we love human stories. We're always sort of desperate to put a smile on our faces. And Bournemouth's David Brooks coming back into the squad for the first time in 525 days since beating Cancer is certainly one of those, isn't it?
Brilliant news for him. Brilliant news for Bournemouth. I'm of the belief that had he have been fit when they were relegated from the Premier League last time around, they probably wouldn't have gone down. I hope he can get back to that form, the type of form that was catching admiring glances from Manchester United. Last time I saw David Brooks was in a hotel in Qatar. I was with Fatboy Slim at the time. He was on his way to watch England against Wales, wearing a Wales shirt with his own name and number on the back. He was so excited to be out there watching his teammates, but obviously gutted that he couldn't play. So I'm delighted for him.
And gutted that he bumped into you and Fatboy Slim, I would have thought.
There's a joke in there somewhere.
Fatboy Slim? Could I ask?
Well, we chaperoned him for the day, didn't we? Because a friend of mine sorry, it wasn't Fatboy Slim. It was
Pete Tong.
It was Pete Tong. It was Fatboy Slim who asked us to look after
Sorry,
Pete
this
Tong.
is the most Partridge thing ever. Firstly, you tell an anecdote about Fatboy Slim, and then it turns out you got it wrong.
It was Fatboy Slim's mate. We were with Pete Tong, and Fatboy Slim had asked us to look after him for the day because he was doing a performance after the England-Wales game.
So you weren't with Fatboy Slim, you were with a completely other DJ, but you're so well tuned with your musical knowledge that you didn't realise that you were with the other DJ. Well done.
That would have been a great story.
You recognise David Brooks, though, right?
Well, he had his name and number on the back of his shirt, so I couldn't miss him.
We're going to have to get Pete Tong an Arsenal jersey. He's an Arsenal fan with a Tong #1 on the back, just so that Crook can identify him. There is proof that commentators and football correspondents can only identify people if they're wearing their actual football shirts with their name on the back. The last time that Bournemouth played Liverpool, they lost 9-0 at Anfield, and it's always difficult, isn't it, when you've had an absolute spanking to come back and try and take on the same team or the same club that absolutely gave you your worst day. The fact that they stood up to the task and played a completely different game this time around, Bournemouth, shows the resilience that they've learned over the course of that 6 months. I don't know if they've got a chance to stay in the Premier League or not, in terms of a good chance to stay in the Premier League. Of course, they have a chance. And whether they do it remains to be seen. But Kevin, I thought there was something about them towards the end of that game when they made changes that didn't mean they sat behind the ball, defended deep and tried to dig out a result. They actually tried to get on the ball more and try and play with the football to dominate a little bit more of possession, to take the pressure off the defence.
100%, because especially towards the end of the game, I thought that really stood out because Jurgen Klopp talked about this. You win the ball deep, you take Liverpool all the way back to their penalty area, and then it's so hard for Liverpool to build pressure because then they've got to use energy to get all the way back to the Bournemouth box. So they counter-attack really smartly. I think they've made some good signings. I think Ouattara, it was a risk because this is a guy that was in the middle of his breakout season with Lorient. Nobody knew if he was going to be able to translate that form. I'd seen him play in Ligue 1 a fair bit, knew he was exciting, knew he was always trying to affect the game. But you can't always bring that to a higher level in the Premier League, but he's done it. And I think this has happened to Liverpool before. I think the season they beat Palace 9-0. They then lost to them in that crazy FA Cup semi-final where I was so angry I hit my head on a radiator, but there we go.
It's all coming out this morning.
Yeah.
How did you hit your head on a radiator?
Pardew, while I was watching at home, Pardew scored. I kind of went back like that in anger and hit my head on a radiator. So it was doubly painful for me as a Liverpool fan. So, yeah, there's no guarantee. Just because you've smacked somebody in one game doesn't mean you'll win the next one. And Bournemouth played really well.
Yeah, they really did. Big problems for Liverpool in terms of getting into the top four because they require quite a lot of investment, I think, to tinker with their squad over the summer and get themselves back into a position where they can start competing for the title again, as they have done over the last few years. That investment will need to come from outside. FSG are not going to pump loads more money in the summer. They're going to wait to see if they can get a minority shareholder to come in and buy a part of the business and then try and invest that capital. If that doesn't happen before the summer, then it may well stunt Jurgen Klopp's ability to try and rebuild this team on the fly.
That would be a real shame.
See what happens. They definitely need Champions League football because that comes with a load of cash injection as well. Don't be sarcastic. Why can't you just enjoy your own team's performance? You don't have to have a go at everybody else.
We haven't got to his team's performance yet.
Yeah, he's still upset about the red card, and we'll talk about that in detail very shortly. No one was upset if they were wearing an Arsenal shirt this weekend.
It's finished Fulham 0, Arsenal 3, all 3 assists coming from Leandro Trossard. What a January signing he is turning out to be.
He created 3 goals, he could have scored 2. I think it was really impressive. We dominated the game, we created so many chances, we kept a clean sheet, which was really important, and we won the game in a convincing way, so very happy.
They're good, aren't they, Kev?
Oh, they're amazing, Sam. Brilliant to watch, and a really outstanding performance. I mean, they just, every time you think they're going to fold or they're going to be a bit brittle, they come up with something brilliant, and this was outstanding.
Yeah, unstoppable maybe is a good word for them, because they've become the first side in English Football League history to win 5 consecutive London derbies away from home. And the neutrals that turned up, Crook, hoping for another bout of late drama, last-minute goals, were sorely disappointed because this was over so quickly.
Yeah, it was, and I think Fulham were grateful that Arsenal declared at half-time, to be honest, because it could have been 7 or 8. They were absolutely sensational in that first half. They're on course to rack up 92 points this season. If they keep picking up points at the current ratio, no one's going to stop them. Leandro Trossard, what a signing he's been. First player in Premier League history to get a hat-trick of assists in the first half. Martinelli was brilliant. Saka actually wasn't his best, but it didn't matter. Ben White, really impressive, raiding down the right-hand side. I think they'll win it. You know, I think they have the momentum. I think Manchester City are grinding out wins, but they look a bit stodgy to me. Arsenal, pains me to say it, they're the best team in the country. I don't think anybody can argue that.
Trossard signing is really important, Kev, right? Because ultimately, initially, it's almost like they stumbled over it. They didn't stumble over it, but it's almost like they did, because they wanted to sign Mykhailo Mudryk. That deal was about to happen. Chelsea nipped in and grabbed him at the last minute. And instead of getting a very expensive, potentially brilliant player for the future, they had to bring in someone who was Premier League ready-made. And he has slotted into the team like Henrik Larsson did for Manchester United all those years ago. Just when you need something that little bit extra to raise everybody's level, someone who's been there and done it in the Premier League and can translate that form immediately into output.
Well, he's grasped the opportunity is the first thing, because this was a step up for him, with all due respect to Brighton and what they've done. This was an opportunity to push for a title, and some players would shy away from that. Some players would move towards the light, and he's absolutely done that. Thought he was outstanding in this game. I think he has been in other games. Mikel Arteta talked about his calm. You know, guys who've worked with Guardiola talk about this a lot, this la pausa, this kind of ability to almost stop time, have a look around, see what's there. Players like Gundogan have definitely got it. Those guys who can just almost like the Matrix, be slightly out of the rest of reality and see what's going on. And he's absolutely one of those. And
visualising Leandro Trossard as Keanu Reeves now.
Yeah, maybe a little short for that, but maybe. He is a really good sign for that football club off the field. And what I mean by that is that I think on the field, Arteta's taken really big strides in terms of the mentality. That's been there for all to see. Off the field, they're a little bit scattergun at times previously. I think now, okay, we didn't get that guy. Who's the next guy? We didn't get that guy. Who's the next guy? The good clubs have that. They don't panic. They go, okay, this didn't work out the way we wanted. We had a price we would go to. We wouldn't go past that. What do we do now? And I think there are really good signs for Arsenal in that regard, on and off the field.
What about Fulham, though? Because they've had a little bit of a dip. They look to be fading fast. They had no Palhinha at the weekend. And that's always a big problem, because he's been such a terrific influence on their midfield. But Alexander Mitrovic's goals has dried up. He's got 11 this season in the Premier League, but none since January. And Crook, I wonder whether or not it's coincided with an injury to Willian.
Yeah, possibly, because certainly Mitrovic didn't have much service in the game on Sunday. No goals in 9 now for him, as you mentioned. He's still stuck on 11. He's never scored 12 in a single Premier League season. I'm sure he will get there, but it's taking its time. Palhinha was a massive miss, and actually this plays into Adrian Durham's theory that he got battered for by Arsenal fans, that they have had a lot of luck this season in terms of coming up against teams when key players are missing, like Casemiro was for that game at the Emirates, and Palhinha the latest. I just fear for Fulham now. They've got enough points for safety. They're probably not going to qualify for Europe because they're better teams in and around them. I wonder if we might have the flip-flops and the beach towels out very shortly when it comes to Fulham.
Oh, give over. I tell you what, though, it is a great place to go celeb spotting, isn't it? Fashionable Fulham. Brian Cox from Succession was at the game on Sunday. The commentary position is behind where Hugh Grant has a season ticket, so you see him there a lot. Mick Jagger had come across town to watch Arsenal.
3 goals, 3 points, and Chelsea will leave the East Midlands with a 3rd victory. There are chants to your right-hand side of "We want Rodgers out."
You know, it's obviously you want your team to be supported at home and the crowd behind them. But listen, that's where it's been.
It's really impressive from the players because it isn't easy to do that in the Premier League. So delighted for them, delighted for the supporters who travelled, who were fantastic. So we've had a good week.
Leicester 1, Chelsea 3. And did we get a glimpse into the future at the King Power Stadium?
Well, what do you mean, Sam?
He means is Brendan Rodgers going to be the next Chelsea manager?
No, actually, there was a bit of pre-match entertainment and Pete Tong was DJing. Or was it Fatboy Slim? No, I meant that
Joe
Chelsea
Wiley
played in a slightly different system where they had Mudryk at the top of the formation and Kai Havertz just behind him, João Felix just off him. And I just thought that their attacking play was really slick. And they could have had more goals if it hadn't been for a couple of offside decisions.
Followed on, I thought, from what was a tremendous performance against Dortmund. I thought Havertz, João Felix were outstanding. The way Havertz protected the ball, brought others into play. They posed a threat in behind. And I think they carried on that attacking form against Leicester. It wasn't a perfect performance. Leicester could have equalised. Dewsbury Hall should have equalised. That was a great opportunity that he made a mess of.
Well, there was a wobble actually at the end of the first half where actually Chelsea could have lost control of the game and Leicester looked the most likeliest to score. And then Daniel Almaty decided to physically assault Kai Havertz with his studs and make him look as if he'd been slashed by Wolverine over his chest. And the referee went, play on.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. I mean, they chose the aggressive path. They chose violence, Leicester City, and it kind of worked out for them in some ways. But look, I think something's happened with Chelsea in the last couple of games. And I think part of it is due to some of the injuries clearing up. Obviously, Chilwell and James didn't play in this one, but did play in midweek. That makes it look far more like Potterball, because if you've got 2 genuine wing-backs who can play that role, that's the key to everything he does, really. He wants those 2 deeper inside forwards. So that's Kai Havertz and João Felix, who play that role really, really well between the lines. And Mudryk's interesting because he can really stretch a team. He's got explosive pace. He's quite smart in the way that he moves. And he's young enough and untested enough to actually not be wedded to one position. I think he could retrain and play in a central role. So I think, look, early days, but promising signs in the last couple of games for Chelsea.
Mudryk's only played 50 games of league football his entire life. So the idea that he is the finished article is completely wrong, which is why a lot of people sort of raised eyebrows over the fact that he cost 88 million quid. Quick word on going back to your old club and scoring goals, right? Because a lot of people don't like the fact that when you are an ex-player, you go back to where you made your name, you score a goal, and then you don't celebrate. Well, completely against convention, Ben Chilwell refused to get involved in this. He actually came out afterwards and said it was one of the most enjoyable goals I've ever scored.
I love that.
I love it too.
Love that.
It was getting pelters the whole game, so why shouldn't he enjoy it?
And what I really enjoyed actually against Dortmund was that he was like some kind of old school Serie A defender, like Catenaccio. He was like roughing people up. He was winding them up. He was drawing them into challenges and having a bet. I love all that. I think that's great, especially if it affects the game and he's putting off opponents. So I've got a lot of time for that.
Yeah. Crook, you'd be happy with this, surely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a disgrace that Leicester fans are on his back in the first place. This is someone who did a good job for their football club. They made huge money when they sold him. I don't get it. You don't have to boo every ex-player that returns. Actually, we were speaking to Les Ferdinand this week for a Newcastle book that I'm working on. He was saying that what he loves most about his career is that when he goes back to QPR and when he went back to Newcastle, even though he was only there 2 years, both sets of supporters ended those games by singing his name. And he said that I must have done something right. I just think that tells us those two fan bases are quite classy and Leicester's aren't.
It also tells you it was a long time ago because it's completely different now. Basically, if you played for a club and then you go back in a different shirt, you just get booed. That's just the way things have sort of changed over the course of the last few years. It lacks a little bit of nuance, really, doesn't it? Because there are some players that have done well for you and then have just, for whatever reason, moved on. It's very unlikely now that someone comes back and they get a great reception. It happens, does happen, of course it does, but not as often as the boos and the jeers. There was a lot of boos and jeers when it comes to Leicester City at the moment because they're not playing particularly well and they seem to crumble really quickly. I watched them against Manchester United at Old Trafford and they were all right in that game for large parts. A bit like this match, really. They were in the match and then all of a sudden they conceded a second goal and crumbled, and the same thing happened here. They are looking over their shoulder now, aren't they? Because they're third from bottom, level on points with Bournemouth, and James Maddison's assertion last week that they weren't in a relegation battle looks increasingly more foolish, doesn't it, Crook?
And dangerous. You know, if that's what the Leicester players are thinking in the dressing room, then they are bang in trouble. And I get the impression that maybe the owners are of that thinking as well. That's why there's no immediate desire to replace Brendan Rodgers. I mean, I think it's too late for that at this stage of the season. Who do you get in that gives you more of a chance of staying up than Brendan Rodgers? But if those players seriously believe they're too good to go down, that could well be their undoing, because there's teams down at the bottom of the league, and we've mentioned Bournemouth already, that are showing a lot more heart, desire and commitment than this group of Leicester City players.
And Newcastle 2, Wolverhampton Wanderers 1. So you want to talk about XG now, Crook?
I do, actually, yeah. You made me a few quid at the weekend. Your Alexander Isak stat, I had that in my head, backed him for the first goal, backed him to score any time. He duly obliged. And I thought this was the game where Newcastle would get back to winning ways, to be honest, because Wolves just lack a goal threat, don't they? And that's why they're going to be right in the mix until the end of the season. And who knows, this could well be a turning point for Newcastle. They weren't brilliant. I thought Nick Pope at times really was a bit of a liability and probably should have been sent off. I think he was partly culpable for the goal they conceded. He doesn't need to be rushing off his line as he did. But in the end, they've got the job done. It could be quite a big win.
Turning point. They've literally had a couple of bad weeks. That's it. They've been fantastic all season. What are you
barely won a game
about?
This year.
So what? They've been playing brilliantly over the course of the season. They've had a couple of weeks where it's been a bit stodgy. They've had some tough games. Now, they're still well within their rights to believe they can get into the top four.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but they needed a win and they needed some semblance of a performance. And I think they got it at the weekend.
I've been banging the drum for Alexander Isak the last couple of weeks, Kev. I never understood why he didn't start the cup final. He's a good purchase. He's 23. He's difficult to handle, and he's got a bright future because he can do sort of two roles, can't he? He can play as a striker. He can play off of the side. But he can also play in that sort of number 10 position. He creates a lot.
Yeah, really smart guy. I think the way he moves on and off the ball, very, very intelligent. Took his goal well, just a little push of the defender, made the space, great header. And I think he needs to play. I've always felt he's a rhythm player. I think when he's had long runs of games for Real Sociedad, he's looked good. This is why it didn't work for him at Dortmund, because he was never really trusted to be a first-team player. He was very young, to be fair, as well. And so he couldn't quite get that rhythm. But I think if he plays regularly for Newcastle, between now and the end of the season, we've got every chance of seeing why they paid that amount of money for him. I thought the Pope thing was really touch and go. I don't think Jimenez helps himself because he's anticipating the contact. I think if he just tries to stay on his feet, maybe he just runs through and scores. So, but how the VAR doesn't then recommend another look at it, really quite surprised when you consider the distance the referee is from the incident, to not say, do you know what, actually go and have another look and see how much contact you think there is. I'm a bit surprised.
Is this
by
because
that.
Actually, if you do that, the feeling is now that even if you recommend a review, then it's almost certain that you have to give the decision that the referee didn't on field. You have to overturn that decision.
Sam. Refs have got to be stronger. If you know, you see this in other countries where a ref will have a look at the monitor. And I know, like, opposition fans will always get that sinking feeling maybe and think, oh, no, you know, he's going to overturn the decision or whatever. But I have seen refs go, no, actually, I was right first time.
It doesn't happen very often in this country, does it? I think it's happened like twice.
But it should. It should, because refs should be able to say, right, I've still got primacy. I'm still the boss here. I'm going to have another look at this. Oh, no, I was right. But if they genuinely do think they were wrong, then they should have the gumption to actually change it as well. So I think in an incident like that, looking at how far the ref was from the play, given how important it is for the game, just go and have another look. It's not hard. The screen's there. Just go and do it.
Miggy Almiron, the screen's so good it even adjusts itself up to your eye line height. It's brilliant. It's literally there for you. Miggy Almiron came off the bench to save the day, scoring the winner with 12 minutes left. I love this kid, right? I know he's not a kid, actually. He's nearly 30, but he looks like he's about 15.
Yeah.
And he's got sort of like that sort of kid joy in his face every time something great happens. And he's just been, I think he's had a great season. I know he's had ups and downs, and he's gone through a period where he hasn't scored too many goals, and he's gone through games where he's scored a glut of goals in succession. But I'm so pleased it's come good for him, because there's not many players that come from Atlanta United in the United States of America, from the MLS, into the Premier League and become a massive success. And it's almost a little bit like that. Do you remember that film that they did about a Latino kid who comes over to the Premier League and makes it big at Newcastle United and becomes a world superstar? Maybe that is Miggy Almiron living out that film.
That was the film that Darren Ambrose was supposed to be starring in, and then they cut his scene. He took his wife and kids to the cinema to watch it, and he never appeared. But yeah, you're right. And listen, we might look back at the end of the season, and Almiron's goals might just be the difference between Newcastle qualifying for Europe, maybe even qualifying for the Champions League, and not.
Okay, I'll tell you who else is thinking about qualifying for the Champions League. Manchester United. But they dropped points at home this weekend. That doesn't happen very often.
It's finished here at Old Trafford. Manchester United 0, Southampton 0. And the game turned on its head on 32 minutes with a red card for Casemiro.
So there's another one inconsistent. The refereeing is coming in the start of the season with the policy. We are Premier League. It's going strong here. We want intensity. Casemiro is across European leagues in over 500 games. He had never had a red card. And now he had twice. Overthink that. But he plays tough, but he plays fair.
Red alert. Manchester United's best summer signing is going to miss 4 games. How much of a blow is that, Crook?
I think it's a blow when it comes to the FA Cup game against Fulham in a week's time. I think the Premier League games that we've got should be winnable with or without him, but it's a blow because the squad isn't very deep. I like Sabitzer, but I think he's still getting to grips with the pace of the Premier League, having not played much in Germany. Listen, I tried to defend the red card on Sunday night. I was doing the Arsenal game with Chris Perry, and we had the United game on our monitor, and we both felt that it was a little bit harsh. By the letter of the law, Sam, you'll tell me that it was a red card.
You're going to backtrack now, aren't you?
No, because
after telling me it's not a red card on text yesterday and saying no, not for me. You're now going to say that you think it was.
It's still not for me, and I think you can judge it by the Southampton players' reaction. They were almost apologising as Casemiro was leaving the pitch. He was absolutely devastated. But what frustrated Erik ten Hag, and he's right, is that Andre Mariner was the VAR official. He was the on-pitch referee the day before when he didn't send off, I think it was Papi Mendy, wasn't it, for the challenge on João Felix. And then 24 hours later, he recommends a red card for arguably a not as severe challenge. So I'm fully on board with Erik ten Hag. I think Andre Mariner is a poor official. I don't think Anthony Taylor is great either. I think Casemiro has been the victim of that.
Yeah, it's all a lot of bluster, but it was a red card, right, Kev?
Yes. It just is.
Yeah, I mean, you can say he was upset and he was distraught and the Southampton players gave him a cuddle, but ultimately it was a red card because he's left the ground with 2 feet. He's not in control of his body. He does get the ball, but it hasn't been a defence in law for 15 years. He follows through over the top of the ball with his studs showing. And as a result of that, in the modern game, whether you like it or not, it is the law that is going to be a red card. There's no sort of debate about this, and any appeal will be spurious, right, Kev?
Yeah, because he's experienced enough to know that you can't go in like that. If you do go in like that, you're taking a risk. You know, this isn't some guy who's just wandered in and has barely played. He's played hundreds of games. He knows how to walk that disciplinary tightrope. I love the idea that Ten Hag said, well, he's played loads of games at the highest level and doesn't go off. Well, he's talked his way out of a fair few down the years, so let's not make out that Casemiro is some kind of saint who's being demonised in the Premier League. But look, it's a poor challenge. It's one of those, it can be or it can't be, but I can see why it's a red. I can absolutely see why it's a red. And he has to go. And the other one was a red as well, the one before. Against Palace, so he's got to take his medicine.
Was it any worse than the Sabitzer challenge that you may remember? I think it was against Newcastle, was it? Or it was the game before the cup final that wasn't a red card. I think Sabitzer's tackle is arguably worse than that one.
As well. He should have gone for that as well. Too. But I mean, you can go back through loads of games and go, "Oh, that wasn't a red."
Fabinho down at Brighton,
100%, 100%. Fabinho should have gone for that, and I think even he made the challenge and then went, "Oh." That was really bad, and then didn't
the referee get in trouble for that as a result?
No, well, there was no red card, was there? And then there was VAR.
I think the referee was, and I may be talking out of school here, but I think something happened with the referee where because he missed that challenge, I don't know if they took him off a game.
Oh, got dropped for the next weekend. True. I think that might be true, actually. Yeah, I think that might be. It was a really egregious error, I thought, because even
can we send Andre Mariner to the National League then?
Stop having
They might not want him.
Andre Mariner. I mean, okay, so he had a bad game on Saturday. I mean, it was absolutely dreadful. We should have sent off 2 players. He ended up only sending off 1. But we'll come back to him in just a second. But let's just talk quickly about Manchester United and their approach yesterday as well, Crook, because again, we talk about the great tactical tweaks that Erik Ten Hag does, and he maybe overcomplicated it a little bit with a front 5 at the start of the game yesterday and playing Jadon Sancho in a different position.
Yeah, I think he overcomplicated it. Certainly when he made the change, I understand why McTominay came on, but surely the sensible call there would have been to put Rashford through the middle and Sancho back out wide. Sancho, for me, looked a bit like a fish out of water in that false number 9 position. I wasn't devastated by the draw. When you play with 10 men, you're probably not at your best against a side who are showing a little bit of fight and determination, just don't get beat. And what they didn't do, United, was crumble, whereas they did the previous week. So you're not going to get too much of a rise out of me in terms of the overall result. I thought it was a good game, actually.
Also, the fact is you're doing your deflection technique stuff that you've obviously learned from the politicians over the course of the last few years, in which, it was a difficult day. It wasn't particularly great for Casemiro, but you just keep talking about Andre Mariner as if he was the reason that you ended up not getting 3 points from that game. Don't look over here, look over there. Yeah, it's a great idea. Go on then. What were you going to say, Kev?
I was just going to say about Sancho, I wonder if his future at United could be through the middle. Actually, as a 10 or not as a false 9, not as a striker. No. But in all he needs, he's known as a winger, right? That's what people know him as. That's where he's played most of his football. But he's not the kind of guy that weaves past 3-4 players, takes them on one-on-one and does that. He's never been that. He's a guy that uses the ball to take people out of the equation. So all those little 1-2s, all those little combinations, as long as he's got runners around him, that's where he does damage. At Dortmund, he did it with Hakimi, he did it with Guerrero, but all that was having good players around him to combine with. He's got a lovely weight of pass. So if you move him into a central role, have a good striker in front of him, have midfield runners either side of him, it's exactly the same thing. And so he's still got that vision, he's still got that ability. So I'll be interested to see what Ten Hag does with him long term. Wouldn't be mega surprised if he plays a fair few games through the middle, not as a false 9, but a little bit deeper.
2 big games this week. They've got Real Betis live on talkSPORT 2 on Thursday night and the second leg with quite a healthy advantage from the first leg. And then they've got the game with Fulham, which is live on talkSPORT on Sunday at 4:30 in the FA Cup quarter-final as they look to continue their charge for another 2 trophies to add to their League Cup. Crystal Palace 0, Manchester City 1 was Saturday night's offering. A late penalty from Haaland gave City more vital points, putting the pressure on league leaders Arsenal prior to the game. Arsenal responded really well to that. But actually, it took a penalty for them to make the breakthrough against Crystal Palace. And they are playing a slightly different game now, aren't they, Alex? They're not the same sort of tiki-taka, intricate, sharp, interchange side from years gone by. They're a little bit more rugged, determined. And yes, there's a lot of creativity, but it doesn't look as beautiful as it used to.
It's attritional. They're grinding out results, which some will say at this stage of the season is what champions-elect have to do. But at the moment, they don't necessarily look like sweeping teams aside in the way that Arsenal did in the first half at Craven Cottage. But clean sheet, I think Nathan Ake is emerging as one of their unsung heroes of the season. He's had a terrific campaign. I'm delighted about that because he's a good pro and he's a tremendous player as well. Ridiculous challenge from Elise. Yeah, what are you doing steaming in there when the pressure was already on?
Steaming, he didn't steaming. He tickled his
clumsy
shin.
No,
yeah, but
clumsy.
he's panicking, right? He's panicking because none of them have switched on at the corner. So he's
Yeah,
like,
they all switched off.
I've got to get there. And he's he's not a defender, is he? So he's gone in. Gundogan's very smart. He's just sucking him in, has made the most of the contact. But that all comes because they're fast asleep at a set piece. That's probably because they've been running around like maniacs trying to close City down the whole game. It's 12 minutes to go and they're tired and they've just switched off. But you can't do that. That's the difference.
Yeah, I wonder whether or not one of the reasons why Manchester City are a little bit more attritional is because so many teams are doing that, harassing them man for man all over the pitch and trying to stop them from playing. You mentioned about them falling asleep from the corner. Most of the people that go to Selhurst Park on a regular basis have been falling asleep for quite some while because this is the third game in a row that Crystal Palace haven't registered a shot on target in the Premier League. How on earth does that happen when you've got Elise, Eze, Edouard, Zaha all in your team?
I think there's been a little bit of... Not panic's the wrong word, but I think he tried to open it up. He tried to be more expansive earlier in the season. And I think he was worried that they were losing games, shipping goals. And he thought, right, I've got to put a layer of, defensive-minded behaviour on this. The problem he's got is that it's still too reliant on Zaha, I think. And, you look at the body of work... I think he got a free pass to some extent last season because it wasn't Roy Hodgson. And I'm a huge Hodgson fan in many, many ways, but the style of football was not always that attractive. I think because he changed the style and it looked a bit more pleasing on the eye, I think he got a pass. And they obviously got to a cup semi-final and they did fine. This season, it's not that great to watch at times. They haven't had a shot on target in 3 games. And you just think, well, actually, what are we doing here? You look at the quality of the squad. That's probably a bottom 6 Premier League squad.
And I think that's probably underestimated, right? That he's probably got more out of the squad last year than the squad actually merited.
Yeah.
And he turned over a lot of players during that first summer.
Yeah, it's, you're asking for miracles to go much higher than that. I know teams look at Brighton and Brentford, but they have better squads. I think, by quite some way, I think. And so there's an element there. I think what to watch for is what happened at Nice. He started ever so well at Nice, and it was going really, really well. And then there just came a point where he became more critical of his players in the media. He started changing a lot of things. And in the end, you never really knew what formation might be, what the style might be. And it just all got a bit haphazard. And he became quite... I think, not angered by it, but unnerved by the whole situation. He was a bit snappier. And so that's one to watch for, I think.
Okay, that might be one to watch, but there's not much else that's worth watching with Crystal Palace at this moment in time. Their winless run has been extended to 10 in the Premier League. Talking of teams that are difficult to watch, Tottenham Hotspur and Nottingham Forest away from home.
Harry Kane with 2, including a penalty. Son Heung-min with a rare goal in a Premier League start for the South Korean. Spurs 3, Nottingham Forest 1.
It was vital to get 3 points. We know we have only the league now, and there are 11 games to go, and we needed today to bounce back, to show that we are strong mentally.
A comfortable win for Spurs at home to Nottingham Forest, live on talkSPORT 2 on Saturday. 3-1 victors with 2 goals from Harry Kane. He has scored or assisted 45% of all of their league goals this season. Crook, what are they going to do when he leaves in the summer?
Probably become a mid-table team if that does happen. I mean, he's absolutely crucial, isn't he? And I feel for him because I think he's been so loyal to Tottenham. He's given them the best years of his career. And as a football club, I don't think they've given him enough back, in terms of putting world-class players to play alongside him, in terms of actually, giving him the ability to compete for the type of trophies that he deserves. And I think it'd be a shame if we look back on Harry Kane's career and judge him on what he's won, or more pertinently, what he hasn't won, instead of the goals that he's scored and the performances that he produces. I think he's absolutely sensational.
Crook, is that a sort of symbol of exactly what Tottenham Hotspur are? They are a football club that just don't give anyone enough. They don't give their fans enough. They don't give their managers enough. They don't give their star players enough. And that's why, in the end, they don't deliver enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And what they have delivered is a world-class facility. The stadium is absolutely magnificent. But I think Jamie O'Hara hit the nail on the head a few weeks ago. It might have been Gabby Agbonlahor, actually, when he said the best thing about Tottenham this season is a Beyonce concert. The best thing about Tottenham is the fact they host NFL games, because as a football team, they are falling well short. And I can understand why their fans and Harry Kane himself are frustrated.
Is that why Antonio Conte is throwing his toys out of the pram? I mean, if you actually speak to Antonio Conte, he'll say, no, he's absolutely happy. And then he'll tell you how bad everything is. He sort of speaks with forked tongue. But he's not going to stay in the summer, right, Kev?
No, I don't think so. And I think but this is the danger, I think, for him. He will always say, well, look, I took this struggling team. I got them into the Champions League. We're in the mix for the top 4 again. He acts as if they've spent £6 in the last 3 years. It's just not true. It just isn't true. Like, he got Porro, and then he doesn't trust Porro immediately, so he doesn't play in every game. They signed Richarlison. He hasn't done particularly well, that's true. But
they never use him. He's on the bench all the time.
Exactly. So he got Richarlison, he wanted him. He got Porro, he wanted him. Bentancur came in and has done well, but he's injured, obviously, so can't help them.
Kulusevski brought him in as well.
Exactly who Conte wanted. Identical Conte player. Works incredibly hard, does his job, knows exactly what he's supposed to do. But some of this comes down to Conte. I was at Tottenham for talkSPORT for that Milan game. Man alive, they were bad. Wow. And the thing was, a lot of the fans you listened to before the game, they knew this was coming. They knew it was going to be stay in the game and try and hit later. What it needed against a Milan team that doesn't have a huge amount of experience at Champions League level as a unit.
To go out and blitz them from the start.
Go for them. Make it uncomfortable. You had Malik Chow, who I watched struggling for Schalke at the start of the season. Just get it.
But he's been brilliant for Milan, to be fair.
He has, but you have to put him under pressure at that level. They made him, Tomori, and Kalulu, who I like very much, the latter two, but made them look like Costa Curta, Baresi and Maldini.
They did, but this is you've got to remember that over the course of the previous 4 or 5 games leading into that, they'd done very well as a trio. Since Pioli changed to a back 3, they ended up keeping Atalanta out. And Atalanta had gone something like 300 games with where they've scored a load of goals and had a shot on target in every single match. And they didn't have a shot on target against Milan in that game.
But it's a farmers' league. Serie A.
Well, no, it's not.
Serie A is not a farmers' league.
It's not.
No, rubbish.
Look, the point Sam makes is a very, very good one, right? That they had, in the build-up to the game, been much better. They'd lost to Fiorentina at the previous game, but they've been much better. However, you can still put them under a huge amount of pressure and you can be proactive.
Totally agree.
And it was such an anemic performance. And I know he's gone, I brought on Davinson Sanchez to give us some structure. Took off Kulusevski. It's one of the only players they've got who, like that, can just change a game with just a moment of brilliance. He took him off.
Here's a question for you, Kev, because you are the European expert. The Champions League draw is on Friday, I think.
Yes.
Who are the one team left in the draw that everybody would be desperate to pull out the hat? AC Milan are
Chelsea.
Right up there. AC Milan are
No, they are. I'm...
Chelsea scored 5 against them.
Yes, well, this is the thing. Chelsea.
That was an early part of the season. That was a different.
Giroud's up front. He's older than Sam.
But this isn't about Milan being a good team. And Theo Hernandez was brilliant on the night, and they played well.
He was.
The point is that if Tottenham had gone at them from the get-go, then we would have found out how good that defensive unit is.
Spurs,
then we would have found
should
out.
Have played them off the park. Come on.
But it was a poor
unforgivable. Losing that game over 2 legs, unforgivable.
I think
he should have been sacked on the spot.
We all agree with you.
Should have been sacked on the spot.
We all agree with you. We think it's wrong. And I've told how many times, what was my phrase about European football? Crook, what do I say?
He says English teams should only be losing to Real Madrid over 2 legs.
And Barcelona. But Manchester United already managed to knock them out. But ultimately, the resource, the power, the players, the coaching, the level is so high in the Premier League. They should not be losing these games, and they should not have lost to Milan. That is true. Although we'll find out what happens in the next round of the competition and whether or not Milan survive or whether or not they perish at the next hurdle. Tottenham probably would have done anyway, to be honest with you, because it's just not very good. Everton 1, Brentford 0. Brentford 12 unbeaten going into this game, but this game was won by a goal scored in the first minute. Kevin, and it's a massive, massive win for the gritty and determined outfit that Sean Dyche has managed to fashion.
Dwight McNeil's stunner. Who saw that coming?
Sean Dyche, because he's put him in a team ever since he got there, right? He wasn't playing very well under the previous manager, and he's hardly been used maybe as much as many people thought he might be when they brought him in for Burnley in the summer. And actually, even Sean Dyche said, look, the reason that I selected him ahead of Damari Gray was not really to do with form or performance. It was because he knows me and I know him, and he knows what I want. And from set pieces, etc., he knows what I'm going to ask him to do.
But it's end product. That's been the thing that's been lacking. We know he can take people on, but the quality of crossing, the quality at the top end has not been great. But that shows what he can do. It was a brilliant goal, absolutely stunning goal. Gives you the perfect start. They rode their luck a little bit at times. Jordan Pickford made an absolutely outstanding save. There was a great goal line clearance as well. And we said when Dyche came in, we felt that was going to be really, really important for them. And I think they're already looking like a Dyche team. They've got that resilience. They've got that ability to grind out a win. And against a very, very good Brentford team, they were able to do that. So this relegation battle is terrific because you've suddenly got teams all over the place picking up points. And you're thinking, you look at a team like Palace, who we just talked about, they're right in it now. They are right in it now.
9 teams in it, including Everton, whose newfound resilience under Dyche, well, at home anyway, they're out of the relegation zone, picked up a third win in 4 home games under their new manager. That Dwight McNeil goal, by the way, against the Bees was the earliest winner for Everton ever at Goodison Park after just 35 seconds. And that's a record that has been set after 130 years. So that's pretty impressive. That's quick off the mark. Not quite as quick off the mark as Philip Billing was the week before when he scored after 9.11 seconds. Elsewhere, Leeds 2, Brighton 2, and West Ham 1, Aston Villa 1. We mentioned Chelsea against Leicester. We did that a little bit earlier on, didn't we? But we should talk about the... Did we talk about Andre Mariner in the end? Because you kept talking about him, Crook. Did we mention that?
I'm not giving Andre Mariner any more airtime.
Okay, well, let's just go over the 3 decisions where he got wrong. He should have sent off Ricardo Pereira after 90 seconds for a foul on João Felix. He then should have sent off Daniel Marti for a sort of kung fu kick on Kai Havertz, which left Kai Havertz with stud marks across his chest. Not stud marks, but like grazes across his chest where the studs had been. If that's not a dangerous player, I don't know what is. Should have been sent off for that. And then when Wout Faes committed a second bookable offence, he seemed to miss it until someone said into his ear, you're probably going to have to deal with that, Andre. And then he went, oh yeah, and then turned around and sent him off.
Bad referee, honestly.
But we do need to be nice to referees. They have a very difficult job.
We must be nice to referees. We are nice to referees. In fact, you're talking to the person who's probably the nicest to referees. And I get a lot of stick for being nice to referees from Adrian Durham, who says, I'm a referee's best friend.
No, you got to do it.
But when they are also making silly mistakes, you have to highlight them. It's about being balanced, isn't it? Yeah. It's not about not having a go at a referee or having a go at a referee. It's about doing it at the right times when criticising when it's fair, rather than just picking on them for picking on them's sake.
Otherwise, we won't have any left.
Yeah.
That's the word.
And Crook will have to take up refereeing.
And you'll be able to tell us about this, Sam. I think they have their sort of post-weekend debrief on a Monday. right?
Yeah.
Should that have not happened on Saturday night, and therefore Andre Mariner shouldn't have been in a position where he was, in a position of such importance in the VAR room 24 hours later?
No,
yeah, but they're all
if on
reffing.
a Saturday night, right? That happens. They've got to then make a decision to get rid of someone, then put somebody else in. It's not ideal, especially and all this idea that referees don't have consequences. They got rid of Lee Mason after he made a horrendous error. So there are consequences now. Howard Webb's getting to grips with the regime. It's not going to be perfect. Refereeing is never going to be perfect because guess what? They're human beings, and sometimes they're going to make mistakes. But okay, fair enough. That's what happens. You just have to get on with it.
Do you know what will
Sometimes
change
it's gonna
it?
work in your favour.
Do you know what will make a massive difference? What they're doing. I know I always rave about Germany. I know this. I'm aware of this.
Do you?
However,
you never really say anything about
the one thing I do like about referees is they come out and they say, look, this is why I made the decision. Sometimes they'll go, I have to hold my hands up. I got this totally wrong. And I'm really sorry about that. This is why I got it wrong, and they are accountable publicly. Yeah. And I do think it does soothe some of these issues because you get refs who come out and explain it. Sometimes the head of referees will say, look, we got that one wrong. The VAR should have had another look at this or whatever. And there is a bit more public accountability. And
a bit more public accountability is always good. And in the MLS, Howard Webb sort of employed this strategy where someone would go on Twitter every weekend and go through sort of like the VAR explanations just to explain why the officials came to the decision that they did after looking at a video review, for example. I must admit, I've got to give them a little bit of credit here because the other thing that the PGMOL have done over the course of the last few months since Howard's been in charge is that they've called a meeting with us every month or so to go back and have a look at decisions and explain to us why they've made them, what was right about them, what was wrong about them. And if you've been in those briefings, Crook, I don't know if you bothered to turn up for those.
No, I have actually. It's interesting because you get to hear what's actually been said in the VAR room.
Yeah, it is actually quite a fascinating thing. So, I think that's better for us as well because we get to understand more of the decision-making process. So I do think there's a little extra bit of transparency creeping in. Not perfect yet. Eventually we'll get to the stage where we'll be able to hear all the time what they're saying. So, but we're making baby steps towards that. It will get better. We mentioned Leeds 2, Brighton 2, and West Ham 1, Aston Villa 1. That rounds up the Premier League weekend. There's 2 Premier League games live for you on the talkSPORT network this midweek. Brighton against Crystal Palace is a massive, massive game. Southampton are playing as well, Crook, aren't they?
Yeah, South Coast double. I think Southampton is live on the talkSPORT app and Brighton live on talkSPORT 2. Neither game on television. I fear for Patrick Vieira, if Palace get a tonking in this game against their arch rivals, pressure is really going to intensify on him.
Well, because it's the international break next, that's why.
And they've got some winnable games in April.
We're back later in the week when we'll look ahead to all the weekend's FA Cup and Premier League action. Remember, there's live commentaries from the Champions League, the Europa League and the Premier League this week on the talkSPORT network. Download our app, you'll be able to access absolutely everything. That's it from the Game Day podcast from talkSPORT. We'll see you later in the week.